There's still time.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman, members, Garrett, Vollendorf, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thanks, Justin. We'll convene the executive management team meeting for Thursday, December 14th, 2023. Our last executive management team meeting of the year. So let's have a really good one. Our first item is an enforcement and education update with our director, Chandra Wax. Sorry.
No apology necessary. It was the right name, so I'm not gonna. I'm not even gonna worry about it. Thanks for driving, Dustin, and thanks for moving me to the top of the agenda. I had a bit of a conflict with the end of the meeting, so hopefully I'll be able to hang out till we're done. This is one of the things I look forward to each month because I get the opportunity to brag about the great work that the enforcement team is doing, being super responsive to trends and educating and working with our licensees towards compliance. So we'll go ahead and get started. We like to look at the number of licensees each month, just so we know when we're talking percentages. This kind of gives us a baseline. We also noticed for the first time that we didn't have a change in the number of cannabis licensees, first time in a long time. So that's definitely just something of note. When we look at the number of complaints by unit, one of the things we'll see is that, remember, we're looking at November, so we were short for the holiday. So one of the things we notice when we look at enforcement data is you can really see when we're, at our in-service training or when there is a holiday, because you see that there's 3 or 4 or 5 fewer work days, and that can impact the data. Yet they were still, that doesn't, however, always impact the complaints we receive. Sometimes, however, the complainants even take a couple days off for the holiday. So you can see a reduction in those number of complaints. One of the trends you're going to see throughout this month in the data is that tobacco and vapor, we're working on our SINAR checks. And so we have over 1,000 of those that we received that we will work on to be responsive to that contract. And so you'll see that's why their numbers are substantially high, because they are out there getting those checks done like we've agreed. When we look at, this is something we look at pretty regularly to look at the percentage of our complaints that are related directly to public safety. And this is also a very consistent number, both in the industries and the total number of complaints that we receive and process being right about 50 to 60, 65%.
Hey, Chandra,
Yeah.
We'll go back to that one. I'm not a math guy, but it just, for the first time, this kind of strikes me. If we looked at the first thing about how many licenses we have, and now we look at how many complaints, and even though we have, about half as many cannabis as liquor, there's far fewer cannabis licenses than liquor licenses statewide. So are we seeing a higher percentage of our cannabis licensees?
So sometimes we see an increase in complaints, and we're going to see that when we get into the topics of, for example, education and NTCs. So sometimes there's an uptick in advertising interest, particularly, or for example, this last month, we dealt a lot with our lab results coming back. So the lab had been paused on work for a little while, and so we got a whole bunch of lab results back in the month of November. And so you're going to see that impacting our data.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, those are exactly the kinds of questions that we ask and dig deeper into when we look at these data, when I look at this data with the enforcement team too. So thankfully, most of the time your questions we've already discussed.
Jim?
Yeah, I had just a quick question. So thank you. I've been thinking a lot about the complaints, and part of this will just be a refresher for me, but if you could remind me of the types of complaints. We get internal complaints and external complaints, and just that process. And where I'm going with this, I'm wondering about, like, if I'm Joe Public and I have a complaint, what is that process for me? Do we just, somebody just goes to our website? Is it advertised? Do we advertise? Do we let people know if you've got a concern, here's how you do it? Or how do people find us? And how do people find the process to file a complaint with us if I'm on the public side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. We do have internally generated and externally generated complaints. We're super non-discriminate in how we receive our complaints. So you can
So I could file a complaint, right?
you could sometimes, it's interesting, but sometimes when I'm talking to people and they tell me about things, even I went to a meeting with an industry last week and they mentioned something and I was like, that's super interesting. Send me a picture of that. And I'll just go enter that as an anonymous complaint to be followed up on. So if you were to ask me a question that piqued my interest, it could get entered as a complaint unbeknownst to you. So by phone a friend, email. We have a website form that Brian can tell you more about, or I can send you the link to. The internal complaints, some of them are a little confusing that we call them internal. So for example, those pesticide reports that we get back from the lab, we get those numbers entered into our CCRS system and we follow up on that. So technically that comes from external of our agency, but we're initiating that investigation based on information we received. So we process that like an internal complaint. And yeah, lots of different ways those can come in, but we do have a form. I wouldn't say that we advertise it, but if somebody tells me they have a complaint, I'll just tell them. They can send an email, they can tell me verbally. We get them called in, we get messages left. But I would say the online form is probably the easiest and most accessible. And
Great, thank you.
yeah, no problem. We can talk about education and violations and how they look standing up against each other. And this is a year to date for 2023, and then both 2022 and 2021 for comparison. You can see that we're doing a lot of education consistently. You can also see that those NTCs, the black column on the right, in the center there on the right for NTC data. We've talked a lot about that, and we're hand searching our NTC so that we can provide you a slide that shows how many of those carry on to AVNs, because I think that we were operating under an assumption that that's what happens with them. And I don't have the exact number or that data here for you today because we're still working on that. It wasn't something that we had connected in our system to this point. And at this point, it is less than 5% is what we're seeing. So we will be providing you verified data on that, but just food for thought.
Less than 5% of NTCs
have rolled over into an AVN in the past year.
Which another way to say it, 95% of the time people correct after they get a notice to correct.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an education tool, and that just shows us that we're really using it as an education tool. It's just kind of the, hey, we really want you to correct this version of an education tool.
Good.
And this is just a way for us to look at comparing quarters, and we're right on track to do pretty much the same amount of education in the fourth quarter that we did in the third quarter of this year. When we look at that broken down a little bit more, broken down by industry, and we've also pulled out consultants, and so you can see specifically the level of education that they're doing. And we are also starting to look at data that compares how much, yes, education helps bring us to compliance, but also what impact does that have on our enforcement work, and how much of that is referred over to the enforcement team to address, and how much of it is that team able to just address without rolling over to the enforcement tools. And you can see that each industry continues to be consistent or improve in the area of education. And also, one of the things we were watching when we built this education unit was watching whether or not it impacted our philosophy that everyone does education. Like everyone is responsible to do education, and we also have this team that does it in a very consistent and uniform way. So when we look at just the number of contacts we had by month instead of by year, you can see that, like we talked about, the hours being the number of days we were out in the field is a little bit less due to the holiday. So you see that number drop a little bit. And then, of course, because of those SINAR checks, tobacco and vapors numbers are still climbing. And we'll see that consistently throughout this presentation. I always like to just keep you guys informed about what the education topics are that we're dealing with. Those regulatory topics about the ways that they run their business and the things that they need to make sure they're covering. And then, of course, followed closely by youth access. We do a ton of education about the importance of preventing youth access across the state, public safety topics, licensing and permits, and either answering some questions about those things or referring them to our partners in licensing, and then lots of advertising questions. That's also something we partner in licensing with. And then we break that down for you by industry also. You can see that youth access is consistently a topic, as are those regulatory issues. And these are all super appropriate to be in the education arena. When we start looking at violations, you can see a relationship here, just so you can see the differences, the numbers between warnings and AVNs, both in liquor and tobacco. And then on the right, when we add cannabis in, you can see that the NTCs there are being used more than we've used them in the past, and used to help our licensees achieve compliance. When we start to look at the topics that we see in NTCs, it just comes down to failure to maintain the required surveillance system, general advertising violations, package and labeling, failure to maintain required insurance, and non-compliance with record keeping. So completely appropriate topics to be handled at the education. In the education category, we see a really good balance here with our education and our NTCs, that we're not giving someone an NTC for serving someone under the age of 21. We're not, or over serving or being connected to a fatality. We're really, our AVN topics are appropriate for public safety violations, and our NTC and education topics are similarly appropriate. That's what we want to see in the data. So when we do start to look at the topics for AVNs, as is consistent, we're seeing the sale and service of alcohol, tobacco, vapor, cannabis to folks under 21, and some conduct violations. Those are going to be over service or some of our drinking on duty, some of those types of things that are more serious behavior from a licensee. When we break it down by industry, you see the same pattern. And then warnings, we'll see again, we're seeing lots of tobacco and that activity because we're out there doing those SINAR checks for DOH. Alternative dispute resolutions, I was informed that we did not forward any this month. So we are, as you can see, consistently resolving quite a few of them at informal and uncontested. And now that doesn't mean you guys didn't see any this month or that you're not going to see any very shortly. It just means that for that month, we didn't take the action of forwarding one. This is an ongoing, and as you know, process. We do our best to resolve things with education when we can get to compliance, and of course with mitigating circumstances when we can do that through our resolution unit. One of our favorite topics to talk about is our compliance rates and what we're doing to have an impact to youth access across the state. You can see that our liquor compliance rates, interestingly, when we looked at this data for October, our analyst said October for some reason is always a little bit lower. It always drops a little bit in October and recovers in November. And he looked back for 3 or 4 years and said that had been true. We weren't able to really find a cause for that. And then we didn't see the typical recovery in November either. So we're sitting at about 77%.
Which I'll just say is not very good.
It is not good. And I, you know,
Industry
I always,
needs to do better.
yes, the industry does. And you can see
We
that
say
we're
it
out
every
there.
time we look at these, but I can't resist saying it. It just, you look at that, it even, it, you know, so, yeah.
Absolutely. Delivery and curbside checks, we did not perform those in November, so I don't have updated data for you on those. Some of that is staffing and some of that is, and this is a positive, we're not always able to secure orders and find places that are doing delivery nowadays. So it's an impact either way. Compliance rate for cannabis is back up to where, obviously not the 100% that we like to give them an award for, but it's back up to where we like to see it, closer to 95%, and a pretty solid number of checks, 38 checks for the month of November. Tobacco vapor, I can't explain to you why this one changes so much, but it does. But this 82% is pretty consistent with the rate we get out of our FDA unit too, and tends to pretty much be the average. Again, definitely not something I'm celebrating, just telling you that that's where it happens to fall. I forgot to point out on that slide, I've said it a couple times though, large number of checks you can see because we're out there following up on those signer assignments. Premise checks, I show you this info just to show you that we're out there in the field having contact with our licensees on a regular basis, and not always just to do compliance checks or just to follow up on complaints. And our goal is to have contact with all of those licensees so they know who we are and we build those relationships and partnerships with them, because we believe that's how we get to compliance. This is just showing one of the things that we do to, because we also believe this impacts youth access as well, is when we're out there in these locations, 37 in the month of November, 7 in the month of November for cannabis, we're checking ID of youthful appearing persons. And then this is our CRI unit, so our criminal history folks. This is a really busy time for them as they are running renewals for a lot of our licenses that come due at this time of year. I'm providing you this data so you can just see as we make this transition with the examiners, we have 40 hours of field time, and this officer request number continues to grow. There's still the second bar from the bottom there, CCRS activity. We're still providing quite a bit of support for that system, but they're also supporting our licensees and supporting our officers and working on investigations as well. That's great news. It's exactly how we want to be using that team. And then we started taking a look at our advertising requests. So you can see the kinds of things right now. Cannabis events are happening. Sometimes around the holidays, we see an increase in that kind of thing. Our FDA unit, this is a unit we have under contract with the FDA. And I share this because while they're not our stats, and I can't represent them as our stats, we see what that compliance rate is. And we see that we have a team out there doing an additional 525 inspections of those tobacco licensees in the state of Washington. So that's great news. IA, we had 2 additional in the month of November. One of those was investigated and resolved unfounded, and the other one is currently being investigated and not resolved yet. I will update that next month for you. Hiring and recruiting, we still have a large number of vacancies. We have 13 folks in background. We got one of those hired this month, continuing to do a lot of things, as you've seen. I try to share with you as we go along, signs on the freeway, things on vehicles, working to make sure we're paying them correctly and doing all of those things so that we can impact the vacancy rate. I have this project slide here. Please contact me if you have questions. I'm not going to insult by reading it to you. I did want to let you know that we have kicked off an SMP team that helps us partner with this licensing phase of the process so that we can make sure that we are completely engaged in supporting that process. And then also we've done 21 staff engagement sessions to make sure that we're ready to go when it's time to say what we need from enforcement when SMP kicks off. And then we're also working on traceability. We're transitioning one of our old EN electronic notebook that we use in enforcement that we're looking forward to replacing with SMP. We're transitioning to a different system with that. And we just continue. We have a lot of projects that we're doing a great job managing. So I'm on time, so I'm not going to go into much more detail about that, but please let me know if you have questions. And then the only other thing I wanted to share with you is medical endorsements. I chatted with Becky, and she was going to share this with you today, but she had another commitment. And so we had 80 stores report that DOH reported to us that there were 80 stores that didn't issue any medical cards in the last 2 quarters. And so licensing and enforcement worked together to follow up on that. And to date, we have 35 of those stores that had confirmed that they want to keep their medical card, or I'm sorry, they want to keep that medical endorsement, and they've provided verification. There are 19 of them that have said they're no longer interested and they want to be removed. And there are 15 that said they're interested and they want to provide us verification. We're just still waiting on that verification. And so, assuming y'all can do math, that adds up to 69. So those other 11, we're still trying to figure out how they would like to move forward with that endorsement. So great partnership there, and lots of other partnerships, but I want to respect everybody's time. So that is all.
I want to ask you about the medical. So if we get that list of 80 that they have not issue any, they're not required to issue. So that's just sort of a flag for us, right? That says maybe they're gone quiet or silent.
Yeah, that's one of the ways in which we thought that we could identify maybe folks that aren't being actively using or pursuing that medical endorsement.
And so what is the next step then? So you get that, someone calls that store and says, hey, we just got this notice, what's up?
So licensing starts with it, and licensing does their work, and they try exactly what you're explaining, which is, hey, what's up? And so they say, oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. We want to keep our endorsement. We just haven't had anybody ask for a card. And they provide us the verification that licensing asks for in order to keep that. And then
what's that verification then? Is make sure they have the equipment they need to issue and a bud tender, which is required?
That's a great question. Okay. Licensing does that.
Okay, I'll follow up with
or I don't have any problem getting you the answer to that.
No,
but
it's not urgent. I'll do it when I have a chance to check.
Thank you. And then they sent us the list of the remaining 45, and then we go out in person and make some visits to say, hey, what's going on with this? And then we were able to confirm 19 that with licensing, between us and licensing, confirm 19 that no longer wanted to retain the endorsement. And then 15 have said that they still do want to retain it. They just have yet to provide us the verification.
Great. Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Absolutely.
The director?
I have a quick comment. It's not as much a question. So going back to the youth compliance rate on alcohol, Chair Postman, I totally agree that the industry needs to do better. And there are some in industry who are doing, in fact, better. And so I'm wondering, where do we go from here? I mean, so 12 months of looking at the data and, seeing this rate that maybe we're satisfied some months, but mostly not satisfied. Is it time to convene a group of folks from industry, some who are doing really well and some who are struggling? And I'm just wondering, where do we go from here versus just acknowledging that industry needs to do better? Is there something we can do, I guess, is my question, to help accelerate a conversation or to, I don't know. I don't even know if it's frankly our responsibility, but I am concerned about it and just wonder, if we
Yeah. Well,
can do something, and if so, what would that look like?
I mean, I think it is our responsibility. It's one of our top responsibilities. We have some leeway in our authority to do more in some areas. I think one of the things we've been working on is, to put some more meat on the bones of our compromises. So when people get their first or second violation for sale to a minor, we're just following up in a different way and making sure they're doing these things that should reduce the likelihood of subsequent offenses.
Yeah.
That's the goal of that, and we need to make sure. So I'll be interested to see what we're able to do there and what that does to repeat offenders, if anything. But I would just again say I think it is our responsibility, and I'd be interested in looking at whatever we think we want to try to do, whether that's convening or review. There's some discussion about what are best practices. I know you've raised that question. Is there something out there that other people are doing that we're not doing? I don't know what that is. I mean, we have a good system. The youth who work with us do this. I think that's a pretty good system. But yeah, so I'd be interested to hear from others. But yeah, I think we should keep pushing. It's not that we're never going to get to 100%. I wish we would
Right.
in all these products, and we're not. But we can do better than high 70s.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why we do checks, because research tells us nationwide, worldwide, research tells us that doing the compliance checks and the fact that there are consequences is what impacts this compliance rate. It's not that there aren't other things that impact the compliance rate, but this has the most impact. And so that's why it's been one of our priorities in enforcement to get those checks done. There are other things we can do and participate in, absolutely. Thankfully, we get a lot of, there is a lot of positive results from compliance checks. And I would agree that it's not where we want to see it.
Yeah.
And I was just gonna add to that to say, do we ask our licensees what are their challenges and what they are encountering in this area? I think the most number one thing we're gonna hear is gonna be staffing and the turnover of staffing and the quality of staffing and on and on. But I think it would be a good idea to just ask them, what are they finding challenging when it comes to this?
Yeah, and to tack on to that, Ollie, what do they think we can do to help
Yeah.
partner
Right.
with them to impact this rate?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
a good
because when
point.
I talked to some and when I talked to a couple of the retailers and stuff, they would say, hey, we have done everything. We do the proper training. We got everything in place. Anything that you can invest in, we've invested in it. The system told them no, and they did it anyway, and things like that. So,
And there will be that human element, which at this point in our history, we're not able to wring out completely of the system.
Right.
But, I
Right.
think that, I think it's a great idea to kind of ask the licensees, especially that second part, what are the things you think would be helpful? I can't imagine we could do something to help them hire better or whatever, but is there training? Is there information, whatever? But so we should chat about that, figure it out.
Yeah, and also look at at our own data that shows us, like I said, retailers who are doing a great job because they're out there. There are some who are doing a better job than others, and let's learn from them. Because I agree. I mean, it's partly staffing, but it's also policy, and so it's a combination between those two. And if we can find retailers who are doing exceptionally well, let's learn from them and help them have us identify what those best practice approaches are. I'd be
one of the-
happy to take more of a lead in this area. I just throw that out in terms of, finding the right. Sometimes I still struggle, frankly, to know how do I advance a particular thing that I'm really interested in. And, I've talked to Will about that, and maybe that's where I go with this, or Director Wax or whatever. But between the two of you, I would love to have more conversation and take a more active role. If the other board members are, interested in me doing that, I'd be happy to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
right.
and I'll see if I can't gather some info about finding some evidence of those folks doing well, so that maybe we can do a survey or chat with some people.
Great.
One of the things we know that is unfortunate is it doesn't matter how big the business is. We've had some repeat offenders of some of the largest chains in the country. So it's not a matter of having the money to do it
Yeah.
or the staff to do it. I mean, I know everyone struggles with staffing now, but it's just across the board.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you.
thanks for driving, Dustin.
Appreciate it. Okay, we will move to legislative update with Legislative Director Mark Webster.
And Chairperson and members Garrett and Bollendroft. Hello, this is somehow, as you pointed out, the last report of the year and also the last of the interim. So legislative session begins on January 8th. So this is going to be brief. There's not a whole lot to report this month. Come January, of course, the updates will be coming fast and furious. Since we last spoke, we had a work session, Director Lucella and I, in the House on several topics. I think social equity got the most attention. It was contentious, as we probably expected. And we have a response to legislators on the many, many questions that they asked us, just about ready to go. Thank you to Brian and the communications team for kind of shepherding that. They also talked about cannabis testing and pesticides. And so that topic continues to be of interest. And they've heard agriculture talk about their proposal this year to take on the work of lab accreditation, taking that from ecology. And we just try to communicate that no matter who is doing that part of it, whether it's RJ Lee, whether it's ecology or Department of Agriculture, our enforcement role is going to remain. That part isn't changed.
Can I ask you a question about that though?
Yeah.
Because that bill hasn't been approved by the governor's office yet, has it? Is there a bill that has been?
I don't know if they've approved that or not. I'd certainly seen the budget request that goes along with it.
Right.
So it's certainly in motion, and they spoke to it.
I
So
know.
I don't think I've seen the.
Because I still sort of, I always thought we were still just kind of in,
Yeah,
the clouds they're waiting to see. So,
I'll double check.
although when I watched, I assumed it sounds like they're going forward.
Right.
But yeah.
Right.
Okay.
The report from E&E staff on tobacco and youth contacts with law enforcement is at OFM in the Gov's office for review. That should be going over to the legislature any day now. This was related to the bill that passed last year, Senate Bill 5365, that limited law enforcement contacts with youth for suspected youthful purchasers of tobacco and vapor products, and it collects a lot more data on those contacts themselves. We're seeing a lot of draft bills come through, a lot of language, including today, everything from biometrics to, of course, the adult entertainment nightclubs, and we're hearing about a lot more. That said, it's a short session, and we've certainly heard from stakeholders who are going to wait a while and come back with more major policy changes in 2025. We'll learn a lot come January.
One quick note on the work session and the questions that we got in, just because I want us all to make sure we're on the same page as and understand. It's one of the questions that you all got there from a couple of different people was about financing of cannabis businesses. And I just want, since I got the microphone, our process to select qualified licensees under the social equity program does not include any hurdle for financing. You don't have to show any financing. Nobody's rejected because of a lack of financing or low financing. So there's confusion about that. Nobody's been rejected. Secondly, the state of Washington is not in the business and will not be in the business of financing cannabis stores. That's not been envisioned by the legislature in my reading of any of the bills or the budget items that have come out. There is money at the Department of Commerce, as we've talked about before, for technical assistance. And there's another confusion there that you know, and I think some of it comes from when licensing director Smith was talking early on about what kind of questions are they getting from the,
Exactly.
they're getting questions about, well, what do I do about finance?
Right.
Because that's a big hurdle. So we know that's on their mind a lot, but
Exactly right.
nobody's rejected because of it. And the Department of Commerce will not be investing in cannabis business.
Right. Although I think this, with some of those technical assistance grants, some of the intended uses is to help people
That's right.
find financing. It is not the financing.
But
It's
yes, there's an important distinction there between that technical assistance to somebody and money that's investing in their business. First of all, we don't, the amount of money they have wouldn't go very far in investing in these businesses. Second of all, you're not allowed to give money to businesses in Washington state. The state is not. The Constitution doesn't like it. So anyhow, okay, that's all I want. So thank you. As we said, licensing director Becky Smith is meeting with her staff today, so unable to be. So we're going to turn to the best available Smith, and that is Brian, the communications director, who I understand first has some report from Becky Smith,
I do.
unrelated.
That is the only Smith we'll have to go with. It's in the room, so.
Yeah,
we'll
and
go
the
with that
best
guy.
available, right?
Thank you. Yeah, so Becky did give me some notes that I'll be happy to go through, and I'll try not to read verbatim. But the Small Business Liaison Team, which is part of the Governor's Office of Regulatory Innovation and Assistance, is putting together a video series where they're talking to agencies about how they help businesses thrive and continue on. And Misty Jones in the licensing division is our agency's representative. My team recently worked with her on some answers to some questions, and I just saw the video of Misty just sent it to us. Thought she was very poised, very professional, just did a great job. So that's posted now to the Oria's website. So I can make that available to people here as well. Great. Next is that Brandon and Misty from that team attended a trade show for KEGRO, the Korean American Groceries Association, and CTAC. And they'd recently made some changes to their process to allow for licensees to complete their application on the spot. And apparently it worked out quite well. They received 27 applications for the program yesterday at that event. And next they'll be reviewing these applications and registering those who qualify, which means that they had no public safety violations in the last 2 years. And as you know, RVP gives members benefits and things for not having violations, particularly public safety violations. On the liquor unit staffing side, it said that in the month of November, there were 17 licensing specialists and 3 licensing specialist seniors. We are down staffed due to various reasons. 2 are on extended leave because of illness. 1 is on a paternity leave, and 1 has resigned because of relocation. During the week of December 4th, we assigned a total of 77 applications and reassigned 22 files from 2 specialists who are out due to illness or resignation. That is a total of 99 file assignments among 16 specialists within a week, which she commented at Huddle today was a lot. To ease the staffing shortage, she has approved overtime, requested some of her staff with experience in liquor to be assigned work. And the division is currently working on a recruitment for 1 permanent and 1 non-permanent specialist. And staff are working diligently to keep up on processing applications in a timely manner. So they're working it. On the cannabis side, the cannabis team welcomed 2 new employees, Curtis Sigourney and Madeline Graverson, and they will soon welcome Mark Mustaine on January 2nd. And she said a new colored dot has been created and added to the GIS map indicating social equity cannabis licenses. And so that's, if you know, that's the map that points out retail locations where they have medical endorsement and now for social equity. And then lastly, just in line with what you just said, David, is that Sarah Davis, the case manager for social equity, continues to reach out to applicants. And although several applicants will be ready in the near future, Sarah has shared that some of their continued frustrations are around financing, including a viable location. So those are the notes that Becky gave. If there's any questions, I know a little bit about that stuff. All right. Would you like me to move on to the communications piece? All right. I would typically start off with the media kind of coverage. Again, they're kind of coming in about 1 to 2 per day. Thanks to Chandra, if she's still on the line, that I reached out to Lori Sigmund today. Had a question from a TV station asking about a hookah lounge that I know has been associated with some issues up in the Seattle area. And she provided some information that I know that Sam Gooder is following up with already or right now. And then just kind of vaguely here is that the Seattle Times had talked to some of us here, including Justin and I had a conversation with Jim about it, who may be following up with that opinion writer about high THC cannabis and concerns around public health, and they had questions for us. I would be looking for that editorial or that opinion piece any day now. Our things tend to run on Sundays when they get the most coverage, but it could come at any point. So when I get it, I will share with the team overall. When I see it, I should say. Moving on, last week, I was lucky enough to be able to attend the CANRA conference down in Nevada. I was part of helping lead a workshop on crisis communications. So yeah, I worked with a team from New Jersey, Michigan, and Colorado to work out various elements and kind of work with the staff in the room. I thought it went pretty well. I mean, the room was full. So I thought that was good. And there's questions all the way to the end, and these things went extra long. So I was glad that they asked for me to help. Appreciate Director Lucella giving me the go ahead and the assistance to be able to go down there and participate, because I know it was important to the organization that we have something on that. So that was done. Yeah. And the annual report. This year, and the theme of the annual report is because it's fiscal years, it includes, part of last year, and we're looking at 10 years of legalization in the cannabis space. Certainly, a lot has changed in 10 years, starting with Washington and Colorado, but across the country. The cover is going to reflect that, but also the current and remaining challenges that every state faces in this space. Technology and things have changed, but they're continuing to change and will continue to change for the future. So it's out with the divisions to review their current draft now, and it'll be ready to be published on time again this year by the end of the year, which is always our goal. SharePoint Online, I don't know if I reported to this group, as you know, I've talked about how we're going to get a new intranet in 2024. That'll be led by my team and working in conjunction with IT and all of the divisions. It's going to be kind of every division is going to have a role in this. Unfortunately, it's been paused by IT until January because they're down some positions, and particularly in the positions that we need for this to do this job. And so they asked if we could just hold on it until January, and then we will resume. So that's where that stands if you're curious about it. On the website, though, that is moving ahead. We're going to get an entirely new website in 2024. It's the look and feel. We might change the platform. We might do a number of things, but it's coming. Met with the IT team most recently to go over the requirements. We've got those straight now. We'll be issuing an RFP for a vendor to integrate and do all that stuff for us, put it together January 2nd. So we're looking mid-year probably for that to be rolled out. You'll hear more from me at a later date on that. And then on the social equity front, I continue to be working with a licensing team on the things that we need to do. And just to share with the group here is that we're going to wait until we have, as people are starting to get licensed, there's concerns about privacy among the people that are being licensed. And so what we want to do is be able to have a broader group that when we roll this out and explain, that we'll be able to have a diverse pool of people that may or may not want to talk to the media about this. So some people just want to open a business necessarily, right? Yeah. And then just lastly, on a minor front, is just that usually once or twice a year, the Department of Agriculture will update their pesticide list for cannabis. They have asked us to do that. I sent you, David, because I know you had interest before. It's been reviewed by the enforcement team, and they're given the go ahead. So we'll be announcing that in conjunction, I guess, jointly with Agriculture and the Department of Health tomorrow. So is there any questions?
A question for you about something that was talked about earlier that on the new policy about medical endorsements. And then we had some stores who said, no, I don't want it anymore. Does licensing then reach out to communications to say, let's take these names off the website?
They haven't, but that would probably be the logical step for those teams that are coming down, or work with IT to be able to do it. Yeah.
Okay. Because that's the ultimate goal here, is to get that, one of the goals is get that website accurate.
So that it's a working list,
Yeah,
correct, that you can
okay.
rely on.
So I'm sure we have that link back somehow that
Yeah.
you guys are gonna, okay.
Bill
cool.
ups.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate both those reports. Justin Nordhorn, Policy and External Affairs Director for Policy Update.
Thanks, Chair Postman, members Garrett and Wallendroff. So obviously lots going on, gearing up, working with Mark on a number of different issues coming into the session. Lots of ideas floating around. We've had some meetings with stakeholder groups as of late. We've got, just to kind of piggyback on Brian's comment, I also attended the Canner conference, really was able to make some strong connections with some new folks, particularly the director of Oregon, which hadn't met before, counterparts out of California. And then after that, we also had conversations with the states to try to figure out what does impacts look like moving forward. How should the different states prepare? Because there's a lot of federal, or there's a lot of discussion across the nation around what the feds are going to do. There's speculation on the rescheduling and the farm bill, and whether or not the farm bill will get in place in time, and if not, then is the election going to have put that on hold for a while? I mean, there's a number of different factors at play, and so when we're looking at some of these issues, I think from our state's perspective, it's we really need to kind of keep on top of them, because we have our trigger bill, and we have similar things down the West Coast. But they don't all trigger the same way. And then once it happens, we don't all have the same standards. And so how does this really interact and play? And so we really need to keep our eye on some of these issues. And although there's some benefits around, scheduling down to Schedule 3, that's still going to leave it in some other regulatory areas that I think we don't fully understand at this point. So I think that there's a lot still to be contemplated around that. I think we're going to need to have some more conversations with licensees on what their knowledge is, what they're trying to see. Particularly, there's a lot of concern right now around hemp, even though we have a pretty strong statute, banning anything that has detectable amounts of THC outside of our legal marketplace and no synthetics. There's a lot of concern and discussion about hemp farmers sending, impairing hemp products through the U.S. Postal Service even. And so it seems still readily available in a lot of different areas. And so when we start looking at how this crossover is going to work, what does that look like for our state licensees and the policies for our state? So it's really interesting across the United States, because we have seen so many different approaches. Obviously, like Minnesota's the most lax, where they can have up to 5 milligrams of THC in their hemp products. And now they just started selling THC seltzers in their liquor stores. I mean, there's just a very broad spectrum of different types of dynamics going on. So it's going to be really important to kind of keep our pulse on those issues. We've also got, after I got back, we went to Department of Health and the Cannabis Alliance held a town hall meeting in Seattle. They had a hybrid option, so that was really good. It was all around medical cannabis, so kind of going along the previous theme. It was very interesting to hear the patients talk about some of the needs and what they were looking for. I think one of the strongest points that continued to come up was accessibility. And some of that had to do with being able to get products. So there was a mention of, curbside service, and why did the LCB retract that? Well, of course, it's a state law that doesn't allow that. And, we were trying to work through the pandemic. And so we were providing some allowances, but that would have to be a legislative change. Other accessibility issues included ADA compliance with the stores. And people were saying, as a patient, they can't even get into the store because of the ADA or lack of accessibility. So should we be considering any kind of regulations around if you hold a medical endorsement, should there be some sort of a policy around having ADA compliance? And so I thought that was an interesting part of the conversation to be thinking about. And then on top of that, of course, Department of Health has their rule set. Their rule set is open. Our rule set is open. So we're trying to coordinate with the Department of Health. They're talking about doing potential terminology changes a little bit on some of the input that they've received. So we need to make sure that our language is flexible enough that when we're referencing the Department of Health language, that we don't have to go back and change it again after we're done. So we've got a lot of coordination going on that front as well. And we're also getting pinged a little bit from a variety of places. The media has done this, and we've had some from legislation around what the board can do as far as rulemaking, particularly around issues like taxation, high potency THC. There's some thoughts that, hey, the board can just go out and make endorsements and do something with the tax. And that's even coming potentially, as we've heard from legislators, kind of relaying that to other folks who are asking us that. So we really want to make sure that we're providing enough information where folks understand what we can and can't do in this particular area. And it's interesting because when we look at the past issues around some of the product types. So of course we had E-Valley, which was a public health emergency. We had Four Loko, which was a particular product that we did regulate. And so looking at that, there may be some areas on, some of the high THC, but can we, create an age, a secondary age gate for it? I'm not so sure we can. So we're doing some legal analysis on that type of issue, but I think that there's a lot of interest in those. And I think between that and some other policy issues coming before the legislature, it seems like there's an interest to push us into this particular area. So that's something that we're really trying to explore when it goes to that.
So on the high THC one, should we have the research folks at least gather what is out there on that? I know that there was a UW study.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is really ripe for some research at this point in time. And so one of the things I was going to share with you is thank you to Director Lucella and our CFO. We had a good conversation the other day about getting some of the baseline foundational pieces set up for the research program, looking at trying to make sure that we have access beyond pay gates or paywalls. And so we're not just limited to publicly available information. We can actually dive deeper into issues. So we have that set up and improved to move forward. We also have some analytics that we're looking at in different softwares. So when we're collecting the data, and we can have that analysis and also be able to do some of the survey work a little bit easier. And so all of that kind of comes into play with that same type of thing. So if we're looking at high THC issues, I think that we're going to have some necessary tools available in the near future after the first of the year that we'll be able to start really honing in on some of these issues. So yeah, I think the high THC issue is definitely a point of interest. We've heard about it from UW for several years. And we're hearing about it from legislators. So what kind of things can we or should we do, or where should that policy discussion go legislatively or to us? And so I think that's really got to be a point of debate.
Yeah, I think so far, correct me if I'm wrong, but there hasn't been a ton of discussion about it in the legislature. There were different approaches, I know, but it hasn't really risen to that level.
Well, I think that there were two different bills that would have taxed it at a different rate, and there may have been one to limit or eliminate it. I don't remember, but certainly two different tax bills to discourage it.
Yeah, but different ways. I thought one was backed by the industry and one was backed by prevention and public health.
Right. It kind of gets to what level of taxation. One was really high.
And what happens is it a seesaw where you bring some down
Correct.
And some up versus just bringing it up, which is, I think it's the sort of, I hope the legislature will engage in it, maybe, bring us and others in to have those conversations, because it is, taxation issues are not in our bailiwick.
And I think those are predominant strategies around, the youth access issues, and I'm not necessarily talking about the underage youth, but also, the science is showing that the developing brain is going in up to age 25. We've seen that for several years. And so if you're having this high potency THC, what's the effect on people? And should we be protecting young adults in a different manner than we are right now? And so I think the taxation piece kind of plays into a strategy to try to, kind of handle that or navigate that issue. And so I think it's going to become really complicated.
And just to complicate it further, doesn't it raise questions also about the ongoing debate about how the state taxes alcohol? We're not taxing alcohol by volume. And some of those same arguments could go there. Why,
Absolutely. That did come up in the legislature with a lot of people saying,
Yes.
is an ad valorem tax going to work if the product is cheap enough?
Right.
Your effect is muted. So yeah, a
And
lot
if
of
we
those.
work to try to, control sort of the market on the cannabis side, I just think we might be hard pressed to keep not, the legislature may just have to look at the alcohol side. 'Cause the alcohol industry has changed dramatically in terms of, we all heard this, we were at a meeting together, but the different products that are out there now weren't there when these tax laws were created. And that's certainly true of cannabis, just in 10 years. Yeah, it's a different world. So.
Yeah, and so the last piece on the research is we have our final interviews this week for the research manager. So hopefully we'll have a decision made here in the near future on that. And then we also have our public health folks have identified and shared some product coming out of manufacturers overseas that are indicating their selling point is this is appealing to youth. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, what does that look like? How do we educate licensees? I know enforcement is heavily involved in that conversation right now as well. But as we're looking at different things around our rule language too, thinking about some of the products and, especially appealing to youth, and is there something from that manufacturing side, not just what hits the storefront, but if they're advertising it to retailers as this is appealing to youth, then what kind of linkage do we have there as far as trying to curb that product from the market? So we've got a number of those things. And then product placement is another point of conversation that we've been having with stakeholders as well as internally on making sure that when we're seeing some of these crossover products, how do people distinguish the alcohol from the non-alcohol and trying to limit the youth engagement and adults, because a lot of folks are saying, I didn't realize that was alcohol. So what do we look at? And so those are some of the things that we'll be looking at in the new year as we move forward.
The health team sent me some things just yesterday on that question. I think Colorado and Illinois both have recently implemented new rules around placement of these products, and I'm really interested in that, and still hoping that industry will come and talk to us about what they could do without action by us. But I also think it's pretty ripe for some fairly low impact regulation, I think, to get people not to mix alcoholic and non-alcoholic, or not to have alcohol and toys together, not to have the baby bottles of liquor sitting on the counter, within easy reach. Someone showed us a photo the other day of a national chain store, where razor blades and tobacco and other things were locked up. Tide pods were behind the counter, unreachable, but on the counter was just a big bucket of, airline bottles, like a Halloween thing. And it's like, if you're locking up your razor blades, lock up the booze, and Tide pods, a kid can't grab the Tide pods. Don't let them do it. And it's like, that seems to me so simple, but yet we're not getting any traction with retailers at this point. So we're going to
similar
keep pushing.
conversation this morning about cosmetics being locked up, but not the mini bottles. And so, it's definitely an interesting dynamic when you're looking at that. And I think it's becoming a greater concern for a lot of folks that we need to be thinking about.
Especially when you hear from retailers, and sometimes even almost an exaggerated sense, about the problem of retail theft.
Yeah.
Well, don't put big buckets of booze out for someone to grab them. I mean, again, you're locking up everything else. Go ahead and lock the booze up. So, all right. the
That's what I have.
prosecution rates.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions about what's going on in the policy area, I'm happy to answer those, but that's all I have to report on for now.
That's great. I just want to say real quick, I've asked a couple questions of the new research folks and gotten some stuff. It's so good, so nice to be able to have quick turnaround and just have those sorts of smart people go, well, let me look at it and tell you what I think.
Yep.
Boy, it's just been great.
Yeah, they're doing a really good job.
Yeah, excited about that. Good work, Member Vollendorf. Now we will have director's comments from the director, Will Akella.
All right, afternoon, Chair Postman, members Garrett and Vollendorf. Just briefly, participated in a lot of meetings, engagements with liquor and cannabis associations and licensees, including tours of various licensees to see and better understand their operations and challenges, so that we have a better idea of how we could potentially move forward. One of the tours that LCB facilitated actually had some of our partners from Commerce, Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, and others. And so it was a great tour so that we could see and better understand from all the different perspectives. Continuing to meet and collaborate with Washington state agencies and our government partners. It seems to take up a lot of our time, spent a lot of time at the Capitol. Mark and I have been down there quite a bit with the legislators. The House committee session, and still continuing working through the internal operations of the agency. I think Justin hit on some of it. Some of it is, funding for resources for the various sections and divisions within the agency, and making sure that we're equipping staff with all of the tools that they have to be able to carry out their job duties and responsibilities.
We don't need to get into all the details of our budget request, but the staffing positions that we asked for were funded in the governor's proposal?
Yes, they were. They were.
So that's research and some social
And some
equity.
social equity positions.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the tribal liaison.
And the tribal liaison as well.
Oh,
Yes.
great. Okay, good. Okay, well, those are all priorities.
Yep.
Nice to see. Okay, any questions for Will? Anything else from the board? Seeing none. Ollie, no. Okay. Okay, great. Well, with that, then we'll adjourn the executive management team meeting, and we do have a caucus and a board meeting next week. Then we will take that next week off for meetings and reconvene after the first of the year after that. But we'll be back on Tuesday morning. Okay, thanks, everybody.